yourself, gonna act your life, gonna act till the morning light, gonna act yourself, gonna act your life, gonna act until I'm a trance, gonna act, gonna. I don't know what I was thinking, but so the from the 8th of the 3rd month of 1435, listening while silently chanting Hugh and Easy Way Discourses by Harold Klemp, Lesson 11, Mind Stuff and the Art of Listening. And it is the 13th of the 8th month of 1440 as a reference. And the spiritual exercise of the 11th month in Ekankar is to listen to loved ones lovingly while chanting Hugh, H-U, like Hugh. This is mentioned on page 109 of the Easy Way Discourses by Harold Klemp. This practice may bring out what is called the golden-tongued wisdom elsewhere. Whether aloud or silent, this practice may not draw attention to any more being said, but it may certainly make what you hear seem more profound. Extending this type of practice to listening to what is going around you can make the experience of the rest of your life seem more amazing too. The problem with looking for golden-tongued wisdom is the interpretation of even the most mundane aspects of life as special messages from God who are supposed to interpret. The blurring of spiritual and religious practices into the rest of life is a good thing, but we need not to live as if simple, everyday life is oracular. You know, as Eliphas Levi said, a sage doesn't consult the oracle, a sage directs the oracle. So, lesson 11, mind stuff and the art of listening. I have mentioned in other writings how Ekankar places the major religions as having their origin in the mental plane, and the claim that is where their heavens reside. Do we need to place intellectual gifts in their own universe, separate from the physical universe? 2 Corinthians 12:2 mentions someone going to the third heaven. How many heavens there are, and more about the 3 heavens find scant mention. The next verses create a doubt as if it was totally out of the body or not. The 4th verse of that chapter does mention it was a paradise where unspeakable things, which were not allowed to be repeated, were said. Well, there's certainly things in psychology that you can't really express when it comes to your mouth. And being autistic, I have different things going on at once in my mind, and I can't say them all at once, can I? The following verses speak about how it is not fitting to boast. Verse 16 has the founder of Christianity bragging about how he deceived people with his craftiness before closing the chapter by having Paul, man of the city, assert he wishes them well. 2 Corinthians 12:7 does say that the founder of Christianity was essentially forced by the messenger of Satan. Is this like God sending a messenger or angel to a prophet who teaches the message to the people? Is the talk of weakness, poor self-esteem? How does all this remind you of the techniques of discourses by leaders of Eckankar. And I did a program, St. Paul the Liar, St. Paul the Dishonest, showing the Christian origins of their stereotypical taqiyya, which in Islam, the victims are not blamed for what they are coerced or forced to do. That's a huge difference in being potentially deceitful. People deceive themselves. Sometimes you don't have to say stuff, but it's different when you're being intentional about that sort of thing. Al-Quran 32:3 warns to follow God's revelation to be guided. Harold Klemp on page 102 also warns about following unsupported speculations from people claiming to be experts on metaphysics based on little knowledge. Which group does the Eckmasters fall under? Al-Quran 32:23 mentions the spiritual authority of Moses to guide the children of Israel and to not doubt that we will have to meet God one day. Is the fear of consequences not the truth that the teachings of karma and reincarnation are built on? Verse 17 of that 32 chapter teaches, surah, of that 32nd surah, teaches one to hope for good consequences hereafter too. If you call the figures of concept something like prophets or Eckmasters, it seems to hearken to the idea in verse 13 about not all souls personally receiving that degree of guidance. Whose experiences can you find proper guidance and encouragement in? Matthew 7:15 through 16 is an interesting passage for Harold Klemp to quote. In that context, the followers of Eckankar as believers seem to be more prone to both mental illness and animosity of other paths, to the point of denying that basic features of most spiritual paths are common outside their group. I was talking to someone last night that's, phrasing things differently somehow meant that people weren't Christian, or, it's like, how many times can you phrase the same exact thing and you're referring to the same passage as scripture? There are different doctrines, but sometimes there aren't different doctrines. People are just saying it differently. Members of Eckankar tend to be as ignorant of the teachings outside of what spiritual exercise to perform. Certain teachings are certainly glossed over. Are these the fruits by which to know Harold Klemp, Darwin Gross, and Paul Twitchell? Al-Quran in 29:45 instructs people to know the revelations to the point of being able to recite them. It goes on further to mention as-salat, or contact prayers, as a spiritual exercise to keep from vice and ignorance, but that the main function is to remember God, remembering God. This has worked well for me and others. What sort of teachings do you think seem more like those of a true prophet of God? Al-Quran 29:2 mentions how those who claim belief will be tested about their belief. The Easy Way Discourses, page 103, talks about using self-imposed discrimination to put your own beliefs to the test. He hints at the Eckankar teachings being new. In Eckankar, there respect but not worship, invocation and evocation of the 973 minus one Eckmasters, because they demoted Darwin Gross. The sort of invented lies and idolatry Al-Quran 29:17 warns about. Harold Klemp refers to the peer pressure and even persecution to keep people in the same path. Does the warning Al-Quran 29:25 about the results of such social pressures refer to the Ek Vahana and non-official Ekankar missionary work? It does seem apparent that Ekankar has made a place for people who believe a whole series of different things and interpret the same things a whole series of ways with less disagreements and less struggles to make things uniform than a lot of churches. Harold Klemp attributes the problem with difference arising from the higher mind or mental plane, Ekankar's ethics, and such too, but claims to have an origin beyond that in a realm of soul, focusing on divine light and sound. The difference is that focus on an attempt to experience divine love as light and sound. Ekankar and Islam call for experience of their scriptures through experience in life, but Islam differentiates between inspiration and revelation clearly, and, imagination. Ekankar teaches that love and power are like opposite poles, but can't there be a power of love? Ekankar is very esoteric in its focus on the inner side to the teachings. Islam values that side more, but does not devalue the importance on getting one's outer life in order. I have been reading Ekankar, The Key to Secret Worlds by Paul Twitchell, as recommended on page 106 of the Easy Way Discourses by Harold Klemp. I haven't read Spiritual Notebook, or Shariat Ki Sugmad 1 and 2 by Paul Twitchell. Well, I own copies of it now, and maybe I'll do a 24 video series on that. I listened to Shariat Ki Sugmad Book 1 and found it full of quotes and slight alterations from anything from the M.M. Pickthall translation of Al-Quran and India's ancient text to Ramaswamy and what would be called New Age books. David Lane didn't catch all the mentions. It runs even deeper. Paul Twitchell's formal role as one of the top few in Scientology seems to heavily influence that book, An Easy Way Discourse, Lesson 11, in its portrayal of a philosophy most would call alternative psychiatry or alternative psychology. Attention is drawn to problems of abrogation in thought and emotion, as well as other problems of the mind before turning to the importance of listening. Abraham Lincoln is in an unsuccessful Senate race, listened to feedback about a speech he was to give, but kept one of the disputed phrases in place. He decided it was better to fail upon addressing the truth of a house divided rather than win by glossing over it. The Easy Way Discourses by Harold Klemp on page 107 claims a lot of people looking for truth don't care as much about truth as love. Could that be why Ekankar focuses so much on love as a vague concept? The next page mentions how many could grow further and even wouldn't need to switch spiritual paths if they were to be better listeners and more open to love. Stranger by the River by Paul Twitchell mentions love as a give-to-get thing. Well, isn't love and doing the right thing? Why can't that be for itself? Al-Quran and the Bible, to a lesser extent, speak of love as something bestowed even without earning it. Harold Klemp's second wife, Joan, injured and disabled man tell his story of how he is grateful for life despite it. She was patient and reminded him healing takes time. The discourse concluded with this art of spiritual listening, spiritual exercise that I mentioned at the start of this. And, their intention for the Hughes song, really, it's a word that means it, but their intention is as a love song for you're listening to people and silently going over stuff like some magician casting a spell. It's not to control people. What's wrong with a little influence, and people notice a difference and you are more likely to be influenced by you when you do stuff like that. So the silent chant has its power too. And if people let you sing and, in the background and break into song, and these are the realms, are their interpretation of the realms. And remember, there is a lot more than this, 973 that they have spoken of. But again, we don't have to remember the names of the planes and my secret number here, including 666 is digit 4 through 6 is 6. So remember, you are responsible for your own decisions, your own interpretations, your own experience. And my channel, the intention is unity, experience sharing, and understanding. Go ek yourself.